The theme of our conference has been this week, the rules have changed. Building on eternal principles. And I hope that in all the messages you've heard, you've seen those eternal principles being brought to bear on the various aspects of the political spectrum. You know, we got Steve Dace here primarily for two reasons. Number one, because he, in his latest book, he's talking about how Christians in leadership, as it were, lose their way when they start making political decisions divorced from those eternal principles. But he was a value add in that, as you heard during the Q&A, here we have somebody who's very much aware that we need to bring those eternal principles to bear in terms of actually successfully communicating our message in a sustainable way. And again, I hope you were encouraged, because a lot of the stuff, Steve Dace is going to be an ally going forward. And by God's grace, we will be able to duplicate some of what he is doing here in the state of Georgia. So let's take a moment to summarize the nature of the problem. You know, Jody Heiss talked about the foundation of our nation and the fact that, as John Adams said, that our form of government was made for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate for the government of any other. And again, the context of that is that our form of government cannot withstand infidelity as a culture. If our culture is given over to infidelity, if our culture is given over to immorality, it cannot, our frame of government cannot withstand that. And he gave the example of Thomas Paine, who wrote Common Sense. He was one of the standard bearers calling for the colony's independence from Britain. But unfortunately, he decided to pick the fruit of infidelity, and he subscribed to whole hog the philosophy, the Jacobean philosophy behind the French Revolution. And yes, when he came back to America, he was roundly discredited, because most of the leaders at that time realized that what this man was really doing, he was bringing things that were seditious in terms of undermining the very nature of the government we have in America. So what we have to do is we have to realize that that's really part of the root, that's the root problem here. The root problem isn't, we have a two-party system. Our problem isn't that, the way we elect our people. Our problem isn't big media. Our problem isn't, big government. Our problem isn't big corporations. Our problem is primarily and fundamentally a moral problem. And that impacts everything else. And my computer is saying something. I need to fix this just a moment. I'm going to keep talking while I do this. Okay. What Thomas Paine was a forerunner of, he was, in a sense, in a bad way, he was prescient of what was to happen really in the 50 years following the ratification of our current Constitution. As New England went Unitarian, and then as the rest of our country's theological landscape backed away from orthodoxy, it not only impacted business, it not only impacted family, it also impacted politics. So the problem is really reflected in the world's rules of politics. You know, Christian philosopher Cornelius Van Til said once, culture is religion externalized. In other words, what belief system your culture holds to as the predominant position will be reflected in the culture around you. So how is what's happening being reflected in the world of politics, in the rules of politics today? Now, again, I most of my political career, I have been involved early on in Republican Party politics. And what I saw was what I would consider, well, three observations that I had was, number one, the rules of politics said that we had to have Jesus-free political discourse. It was not cool to say, well, what would Jesus do when we're talking about political issues? The second thing that I observed as I got more and more involved in politics was a gospel-free political policy and platform. In other words, what we were talking about in terms of policy, what we were talking about in terms of platform, was devoid, as it were, if I can use the biblical metaphor, it was saltless. The third thing that I saw, and this third thing was really the thing that got me started asking questions, and that was, you know, in the rarefied atmosphere of big-time GOP politics, we had Bible-free ethics. In other words, it was not cool for me to ask the question, but, you know, is what you all are doing in the party leadership, isn't that stealing? Or when you make this decision, aren't you being deceptive? Aren't you lying about this? It wasn't cool to do that because you know what, Ricardo, if you're asking those questions, you're not being part of the team. And I said, well, to myself, well, do I want to be on this team? Is it really worth it? So in order to restore the American Republic as we've been bequeathed by our founding fathers, we have to not only go back to that foundation, but we have to operate by different rules. And it is under my watch, this political party will operate under Christian ethics. When there's disunity, we bring peacemaking into the process. Where there's deception, we bring truth and truth-telling into the process. Where there is timidity, and especially amongst the men, where there is passivity, we must bring courage and strength to stand. These are the rules that we're talking about. And there's four things, actually, there are five things I want to quickly address regarding these different rules. And I'm going to deal with, I have to admit, some of you all, especially those of you all that are watching by video or audio or listening via audio, I may step on a few ideas that you may think, oh, if we just did X, then we wouldn't have any more problems. Well, I'm going to say, let's start with this. We must think right in order to solve our problems here in the country. But it's not enough just to think right. So the first one is, the thought that we must think right. In other words, if we had right doctrine, if we did have a correct understanding of who God is and who Jesus is and what the Bible is, if we had that predominantly, then our problems would go away. If the majority of the Christians filling the pews actually had a Christian worldview. We heard today, I'd say 9% that's liberal to say that 9% of the people who call themselves Christian actually have a Christian worldview. I think it's less than that myself. I hate to rain on people's party, but I think it's less than that. But it's not enough just to have a Christian worldview. What did the Apostle James say? Faith without works is dead. If you have right doctrine, yet you don't have right practice, if you aren't getting off of your blessed assurance and doing something with that right doctrine, it doesn't matter. The world's rules would say if you would just believe right or think right, pun intended, then you'll change things. And no, that's not correct. We must not only think right, but we must do right. Second thing, education. We're really big on education. We're really big on teaching people the Constitution, giving people a good historical foundation of not just what the Constitution says, not only the discussion and the discourse that was happening during the ratification period, not only reading the Federalist Papers, but also reading the Anti-Federalist Papers, but also understanding, again, the foundations and, quite frankly, the 2 centuries that happened before the ratification of our Constitution, going back to the 1500s, to understand the root and the foundation of federalism as an idea and how it was explicitly tied to the Christian idea of covenant. It's good to do that. But if all you have is a good educational program, and you're not doing anything with that education, then you're not going to make any progress. We as a political party are not going to go anywhere, because a political party exists to do what? Elect candidates. Right? It's to inform constituents who have a like mind regarding law and government, and to be a vehicle by which to bring representatives to bear who do and will execute on the things that you have learned, having been educated rightly. So don't think that if the Constitution Party would just get people to understand the Constitution, if we could just get every county chapter, if we can get 150 counties and get each county chapter to be teaching or to teach the Institute on the Constitution and similar materials, if we could get that done, we'd solve all the problems. We would fix what's broken in American politics. No, it's not enough. We have to take that education and we have to link it with dedication and leadership. Third thing, there are people out there, let me make the statement. there are people out there that think that if we just built a political machine, if we would just build the political infrastructure to be able to actually run and execute winning campaigns, we would be done. Hey, and I'm all about, again, education and building political infrastructure for the Constitution Party. A couple of weeks ago, I was up in D.C. at the Leadership Institute taking a very full week-long class on being a political campaign manager. And I've done campaigns, and I learned a whole lot. And I learned in particular the importance of political infrastructure. If you want to run as a candidate, do you have a political party? Do you have volunteers? Do you have people who will get on the phones and call? Do you have people who will help you go knock on doors? Is that there? Is that infrastructure there? Do you, quite frankly, have guys like Steve Davis who you can call up to give that what I call that nice interview? Because most everybody that's going to talk to you is going to cut you up. So do you have that kind of political infrastructure? Do you have that network there? But that's not enough. It's not enough just to have the infrastructure there. You know, you got what I call the big Republican leaders in political infrastructure at the Leadership Institute. You know, their thing is, hey, political technology wins the day. And you know what? When I hear some of these instructors talking about, you know, how they're winning campaigns, but yet they talk about, oh, well, who was it that you were, which campaign was this you were helping out? And, you know, he'll say, well, you know, I was helping this campaign. He was a Republican. He was kind of a squish. You know, he didn't stand, you know, I don't believe this. You know, he's kind of waffling on the marriage issue, or, yeah, you know, he's pro-life, but he has all these exceptions. And to which I say, well, you just made all your political infrastructure null and void right there. So it's not enough just to have political infrastructure. It has to be used with wisdom and understanding. So yes, the Constitution Party is about building political infrastructure. Yes, we have to be about building local parties like Bob Heine over in Lamar County, like Jeff Reno over in Chatham County, where people are meeting, learning, getting active in campaigns, knocking on doors, making phone calls, getting the word out, showing up at the county fair. That's the kind of infrastructure that when you join the Constitution Party, this is what we're going to be getting into. This is not a debate society. If you want to debate somebody about politics, go on Facebook. You knock yourself out. We are about action here. Okay? Number 4, and this one's kind of close to my heart because it's been an issue that we've wrestled with since the beginning of the party. And that is, people think, well, if we just raised enough political capital, then the Constitution Party would be successful. And when I say political capital, this is somewhat related to infrastructure. But if we can raise the money and we can get enough people to join the party, in other words, the numbers is the goal, not the principle. The numbers, the number of zeros in the bank account is the goal, not the principle of the matter. But, you know, if we had today, you know, in my wildest dream is if I could say, well, you know, between the Constitution Party and all its sister organizations that we will create along the way, if, let's say, we had a combined net worth of $10 million, and I had a mailing list, a combined mailing list of let's say 500,000 people in the state of Georgia, if we had that, would we be getting things accomplished politically? Yes, because if we got to that point, we are doing something right in terms of the mechanism. But are we actually building something that is sustainable in terms of a Christian worldview and ethic? Not necessarily. If it's all about the dollar in terms of building the party, then we will end up just like the two major political parties in America today. You open up the newspaper and they're bragging about, President Obama, the last quarter, he just raised, $112 million or whatever the number is. And see, to them, that's big because raising more money to them equals victory. Or at least the means to victory. And it is. It is a means to victory. But it is not the end. It is not, as it were, that which we rely on, depend on. So yes, is the Constitution Party going to be serious about raising money, raising a lot of money, so that we can build our grassroots network, so we can train leaders who are dedicated not to Ricardo Davis and, quite frankly, not necessarily to the Constitution Party, but they are committed and dedicated to seeing the message of the gospel being made flesh, as it were, in the area of politics. That's what I'm working for. To my dying day, unless God tells me to do something else, that is what I'm working for. So, again, if you have if you have financial resources, if you have the ability to have influence to bring people in, then by all means, bring them in. Write the check. We want that. I have no shame in asking you to write out that check, especially if you're giving, especially those of you all that are watching by video. In Georgia, there is no limit currently, and this is February 11, 2012. At this time, if somebody wanted to write a check to the party for party building purposes, those gifts are unlimited by state law. Somebody can write me $1 million check, and I won't blink. I'll say thank you very much. And here's a plan that tells you specifically what we're going to do with that money. We have that plan. It's a strategic plan. It's already in place. I know what to do with it after I've shown you, Mr. Donor, Mrs. Donor, with the gift that you've entrusted us with. But I just want to make sure that we are both understanding that it's not just your gift that's important here. It is the fact that this gift is going to advocate something much bigger. And that is that Jesus is Lord, even in the world of politics. Now, excuse my computer again. Okay. So we've covered, yes, we have to think right, but that's not enough. Yes, we have to be educated. We have to become, as it were, students of not only our form of government, but also Christian ethics. But that's not enough. We must build political infrastructure. And Steve, I don't know if you were listening carefully, at the end when he was talking about, when he was answering Candy's question about building a network, a communications network, that's what he was talking about. But that in and of itself is not enough. It has to be what Steve was talking about. It has to be something that's driven by something bigger than just making money. It needs to be about telling the truth. And yes, we have to raise political capital. And again, please, I beg of you, if you have the ability before you leave, you need to see Mr. Ron Haig, because we definitely need your support to keep this going. But that in and of itself is not enough. And lastly, we must cultivate leadership. You got, for the Republicans, they have the Coverdell Leadership Institute. I can't remember what the Democrats here in the state of Georgia call theirs. But we must cultivate leaders. We must have a means to identify, encourage, and to train leaders, young and old, here in the party. It's not enough just to get the young people. Quite frankly, I am blessed to have a couple of folks I consider like big brothers and big sisters in this audience who are leaders in their own right, because they have been fighting this fight a lot longer than I have. Quite frankly, since I was a baby. But here's the thing. It's that kind of leadership, it's that kind of dedication over the long haul that we need to be constantly building. But it's not enough just to have people who have great leadership skills, leaders who have great emotional intelligence, leaders who are able to motivate and inspire. Hitler was very motivating and inspiring. But that doesn't mean he's the kind of leader we want. No, again, both of the political parties, they have dedicated much effort to raising up leadership that is dedicated to what the ends that they're trying to achieve. And it's not like they come off, repulsive. There's a reason why, quite frankly, that for all that we know about Mitt Romney and let's just say his lack of integrity, there's a reason why this man has the following that he does. Because in certain aspects, he is a good leader. He is an inspiring person. He knows how to get people to follow him because you know what? He gets things done. I don't like what he's getting done most of the time, but he gets it done. We have to do the same things, and we are doing these things even now in the Constitution Party. But it is not in itself enough. If we are not building on the eternal principles of the living Word of God, if we're not training up leaders that are not also effective, but they are moral. If we're not training up leaders that think right, but they are prone to compromise for the sake of getting along, or for the sake of, we can compromise a little principle here in order to advance the party, then our efforts are in vain. Because once you start down that road, you're operating from a position of weakness and not strength. And you'll just have to keep giving up your position of strength to sustain what you're calling victory. So this is my challenge for 2012. That we build that on eternal principles, and that we are able to hold out to our friends and our neighbors and our communities that we are about not just being what the Republican Party ought to be. We're about building not just, as it were, we are not the phoenix rising from the ashes of the GOP. Mm-mm. We are endeavoring to build, as it were, a political infrastructure and a constituency that is able to raise up godly leaders to represent not only their constituents, but also to represent the one who gave them the position of authority in the first place, the Lord God himself. And everything that we will be doing this year and the years following will be to continue to walk and continue to work in such a way to help people think right, to help them get the education that they need, to help build that political infrastructure necessary for winning campaigns, to raise the political capital necessary so that, we're not just putting candidates out there and they consistently get 2 or 3% of the vote. We must be cultivating leadership regularly. And quite frankly, training our leaders to train other leaders. Because it's more than just about me and about you. Simon, you need to be thinking about your grandchildren. And you say, your grandchildren? I'm just what? You're 20, 21, 18. He's just starting to exercise, quite frankly, the blessing of being able to choose his leaders. And now he's beginning to do leadership in Habersham County and helping start up the Constitution Party there. And part of my job is to make sure that as he's growing, he's looking for other leaders. And he knows how to be discerning and, quite frankly, to get help in raising up those leaders. That is the state of the party address for 2012. And I do pray that as we continue to work and as we continue to build, God will have mercy on us, so that we would, in our day, begin to see the fruits of our labor.